somebody was kind enough to leave me some reading material. Thanks, whoever it was. Well, I'd like to begin these, which will be pretty informal remarks, by reading a few things from a recent article in the Hebrew press in Israel. This is by a journalist named Noam Barnea, who's one of the leading doves and one of the leading Israeli journalists. It's about a meeting between Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin from the Labor Party and leaders of the Peace Now group, the sort of mainstream peace group. And the article is entitled, it's February 24th, and it's entitled Happy in Their Lot. And it describes how Rabin came to the meeting relaxed and happy, and he explained that he was particularly pleased about the U.S. Dialogue with the PLO, which he said was a very successful operation from Israel's point of view, despite what they may be saying publicly. It was a low-level discussion which had no significance, and its purpose was as a delaying action from the point of view of the United States to allow Israel a year at least, he said, to put down the uprising by force while these delaying operations go on. And he said the Palestinians in the occupied territories are now under harsh military and economic pressure, and he predicted that they will be broken and that they will accept Israel's terms. So the U.S. diplomatic maneuver, he concluded, is a delaying effort, and mainly to give Israel time to crush the intifada, the uprising, and that's very much in Israel's interest, so he's very pleased about it all. Well, there's every reason to suppose that this is an accurate description. I think there's been every reason to suppose that ever since the United States agreed to the dialogue on December 14th in what was described as a stunning breakthrough and a tremendous triumph of American diplomacy and one of the great momentous events of modern history, and so on and so forth. As the Bush administration finally made public its terms, the point becomes quite obvious. There was a front-page article in the New York Times a couple days ago, March 12th, in which the Bush administration leaked the terms that it's proposing to both sides. To Israel, the proposals are that they reduce some of the repressive measures that they've instituted since the uprising began. So in other words, return to a situation just somewhat more oppressive than before the uprising. And for the Palestinians, there should be, I'll just read the actual wording, a halt to violent demonstrations in the territories, that means an end to the uprising, blocking anti-Israeli raids from southern Lebanon, stopping distribution of inflammatory leaflets. So in other words, they should stop everything and go back to the situation prior to the uprising, and Israel will go back to a somewhat more repressive situation than before, and then we can go on. Now, some of these terms are particularly interesting. I mean, violent demonstrations, that can mean, for example, declaring a liberated village, which says it's going to run its own affairs, and then when Israeli soldiers come in to break up this violence, maybe throwing stones at them and so on, that's what's called violent demonstrations. The blocking of anti-Israeli raids in southern Lebanon is an interesting case. There has been you recall about a week or two ago, there was, in fact, for the last several weeks, there's been a good deal of concern over whether the PLO is living up to its renunciation of terrorism, because there have been attacks against Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. Notice it's taken for granted that Israeli soldiers have a right to be in southern Lebanon, where they, in fact, carry out constant terrorist activities, which are typically not reported. There are two kinds. There are the kinds in the areas of southern Lebanon that Israel has virtually annexed as its security zone, where just in the last month or so about 100 people have been expelled, women, children, and old men in this case, because the villages, their villages have refused to cooperate with the South Lebanon Army. That's a terrorist mercenary army that Israel's established to control southern Lebanon. And Israeli forces are there to ensure that it does control them. The Israeli forces themselves have been storming the villages to drive people out. That's not considered terrorism. And also not considered terrorism are the regular Israeli bombings north of their security zone that is throughout the rest of Lebanon. Just 2 weeks ago, for example, a bombing raid that happened to hit a school and wounded 26 children, 5 of them critically. Nobody knows what the further results are because nobody reported it. Last year, in 1988, according to the Lebanese police, there were about 128 people killed and several hundred wounded, and many of them civilians in these raids. But that's not a problem of terrorism. Terrorism is if Lebanese or Palestinians attack Israeli soldiers in Lebanon. That's the kind of terrorism that they're called upon to stop. Well, if we look further, we find still more reason to believe that the Defense Minister Rabin's interpretation is accurate. The protocols of the first meeting between the U.S. ambassador in Tunis, Robert Pelletreau, and the PLO, those protocols were leaked. They were published in the Egyptian press in a newspaper close to President Mubarak, and they were then translated into English and published in the Jerusalem Post January 6th, so you can read them if you like, or if you want another source, you can read the relevant excerpts from them in an article of mine in Z Magazine this month, which is the first publication of them in the United States, as far as I know. The protocols state, the Jerusalem Post article begins by expressing its pleasure that the United States has accepted Israel's terms completely in the dialogue with the Palestinians, and it then goes on to give the verbatim transcripts. The U.S. delegate opens the discussion by saying that the United States has 2 demands that it insists upon. The first demand is that the Palestinians call off the uprising, which the United States regards as terrorism directed against the State of Israel. Okay, so if the Palestinians declare liberated villages in the West Bank under military occupation, the United States regards that as terrorism directed against the State of Israel and calls upon the PLO to stop it. If they don't stop it, they've backed off from their alleged commitment to stop terrorism. Now, of course, if the Palestinians, notice incidentally that they call on the PLO to call off the uprising, the assumption being that the PLO could call off the uprising, or that the PLO initiated the uprising. Now, it's conceivable that U.S. and Israeli intelligence actually believe this. It's total nonsense, as anyone who's actually bothered to look at the facts is aware. The PLO is no more capable of calling off the uprising than you are. And in fact, was very surprised by it. It's a spontaneous, popular revolution, in fact. But typically, over the years, wherever we have records, intelligence, CIA, the Mossad, the FBI, I mean, any intelligence agency that I know of, has been completely incapable of understanding the dynamics of popular movements. They make the most colossal errors in their effort to deal with this. I could give you some examples if you like. And they must assume that they're directed from outside by some, hostile force, because that's the only doctrinally tenable approach to the fact.